Hello and welcome to the Drexel interview. I'm your host, Paula Marantz Cohen, speaking to you from the restaurant Vedge in Center City, Philadelphia. My guests today are 4 chefs, or rather 2 pairs of chef restaurateurs. Each pair is associated with important Philadelphia restaurants. Our pairs are the husband and wife team, Rich Landau and Kate Jacoby, and the team behind a number of acclaimed Philadelphia restaurants, Mike Solomonov, also known as Mike Solo, and Steve Cook, who together are known as Cook and Solo. Rich Landau and Kate Jacoby run Vedge, their highly acclaimed vegetable restaurant, as well as V Street, a more casual street food bar. Mike Solo and Steve Cook run Zahav, Federal Donuts, Abe Fisher, Percy Street Barbecue, and Dizengoff. So welcome to the Drexel interview.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
I know all of you have traveled quite widely, and I assume your travels have influenced your tastes. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about a major influence in terms of your food culture or your sense of food in the course of your perambulations. And I'll start with Mike and Steve. Mike?
Well, I think the most obvious, Zahav, which is the sort of our flagship restaurant, is Israeli cuisine. So our travels, you know, a little bit of my family history, my personal history, it comes from Israel. That's the most obvious. But we get inspiration traveling, I mean, everywhere, just about everywhere.
I mean, a lot of my food influences come from growing up and memories of cooking or watching my parents cook. You know, my mom making challah every night, or my dad making gefilte fish and stinking up the whole house every Passover. So, you know, I have traveled, but I think I always sort of come back to home and those sort of influences where I think, you know, we have an authentic voice.
Abe Fisher, I guess, is particularly
reflective
of those.
Exactly. I mean, and Mike is, you know, known for being Israeli, but half of his family is also Ashkenazi, which is sort of what my family background is too. So there's deep roots there.
Okay, and the two of you?
Well, for us, I mean, you know, we find inspiration everywhere as well. We've had great Korean food up at the H Mart on Broad Street. We come back here just so inspired by that. But for us, our biggest food revelation was Japan, of all places. You know, they say Chinese food is not the same in America that is in China, and you know, that's incredibly true for Japanese food. It doesn't even resemble what goes on in this country. There's no sticky teriyaki sauces or, you know, anything goopy or sugary. What we found over there was a culture that cooked with such restraint. It's kind of like what you thought of, you know, when you hear about these French chefs with the restraint and the treatment of vegetables. They took something very simple like lotus root with some hanchimiji mushrooms and sauteed them just simply down and finished them with just a little dab of miso. So you tasted the lotus root and the mushroom first, and it finished with this kind of like clean flavor of miso as an accent. So it wasn't cloyed or cloaked in anything. And from this, we learned this beauty of treating these ingredients, these beautiful, pristine, and very seasonal ingredients over there, with a lot of care and a lot of restraint, and not to overdo it.
Okay. What about you, Kate?
Well, that's one example, but I think what we love about it as chefs is how we learn about different cultures in the world. And I think it's fascinating just to see, like, if we'll pull inspiration from all of them, but that's how I get to know a culture, is through their food. And then you start to associate, like, the Japanese lifestyle with their food. And then right next door in South Korea, it couldn't be more different. And so I just think it's exciting. You know, plus we get to travel for work, and it's wonderful.
You travel as a kind of research.
Exactly.
That's what we tell the accountant.
I see. Everything's a write-off. As Philadelphia restaurateurs, there's been, you've seen this renaissance, as they call it, of restaurants in Philly over the last, would you say, 25 years or so, maybe even a little longer. I've been in Philly 30 years, so I guess it dates from when I got here. Do you think it's particular, this change is particular to Philadelphia, or is it a nationwide urban phenomenon? And is there something particular, though, about Philadelphia's relationship to restaurant culture that's unique?
let's see. I moved to Philly about 12 years ago and 13 years ago, and I think that everyone was talking about how Philly was becoming this great restaurant city. I think that nationwide, people are just more into food. I think that food and restaurants and food culture and possibly food television
has helped, yeah.
I think it has. I mean, we all sort of make fun of it, but I think people are genuinely more interested in what they're eating now because of it.
Yeah.
And I think that the bar has gotten higher. I mean, there was when I first started cooking here in Philly, there was not a lot of like mid-level restaurant choices. There was like very high-end, or there was like cheap and ethnic, and I think now it's completely different.
That's interesting. The middle ground, you feel, has been filled in.
Without a doubt.
And that's what people wanted. That's why we're all busy.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. So, but I think that is happening kind of everywhere. I mean, every city you go to has got cool restaurants and cool chefs and cool concepts.
Right, right. Steve, do you think, though, there is something Philadelphia specific about what's going on here?
I mean, I think Philadelphia is a great sort of laboratory for young chefs who maybe are just starting out, maybe not with a lot of financial resources. I mean, the BYO phenomenon has enabled people to get their start for very little money. Rents in Philadelphia compared to other northeastern markets, New York, are much more affordable. So I think people can take risks here that they might not be able to take elsewhere. And so I think that has helped Philly. I mean, I always say on a per capita basis, I feel like Philly is as good a food town as any in the country.
But it sounds like you're saying Philly is the startup food in a way, as though perhaps then they go off elsewhere. I don't want to put you on the spot and ask if you're thinking.
That's not necessarily true, though. I mean,
yeah.
I think most of them stay and you end up getting a liquor license and you take the next big step.
That's true, yeah.
And Philadelphians, I mean, listen, none of us would be here if it wasn't for our clientele. And Philadelphians have become a lot more adventurous. We 15 years ago, we had this reputation of being stodgy and, conservative of all things in Philadelphia with our food. But I think Philadelphians are really opening up their minds now, and they're starting to embrace the fact that there's adventurous dining going on here. And I think, if you guys want to talk about the Eater 38 thing, that was huge for us. I mean, they didn't pick Vedge and Zahav to be in the national Eater 38 because we were the two best restaurants, because we defined what's currently happening
what
in the
did
American...
you say? What was it called?
Eater.com is a blog site that's national. Each city has its own Eater. And in each city, they have the Eater 38, which is the 38 essential restaurants in the city. Not the 38 best restaurants, but the ones that define that city's dining scene.
Okay.
Now, they did a national list a month or so ago, and from Philly, it was Zahav and Vedge that were represented on that list, which was huge. I mean, it was a wonderful honor. But it basically told us, and I think anyone really could have picked the two of us out of a crowd that said, those two restaurants are the ones that are defining Philadelphia's culinary identity right now. You say 25 years ago, it might have been starting. I would say only about 7 or 8 years ago has Philadelphia really started to take off. And these guys are a huge part of it with Zahav. And I think that's when things really started to kick into high gear here. And it's just kind of picked up such momentum since then.
I think it's interesting that both of you have restaurants that are, yours vegan and yours ethnic.
Yours isn't vegan?
We have plenty of vegan options.
Vegan options, but
these guys still come to our restaurant to eat, so we're vegan enough.
So they have something to eat.
I just want to know what I'm eating.
But the issue is, and my producer has made this point, that maybe those terms are not, they're becoming very old-fashioned to use the terms, to say, I wonder what you think about it. What do you think about being called a vegan restaurant? What do you think about being called an ethnic restaurant or an Israeli restaurant, or do those terms seem to you to be outdated or unnecessary, or are they too narrow?
I think ethnic restaurant is too broad, and Israeli restaurant
is too narrow.
No, I think Israeli restaurant is cool.
Yeah.
The food that we do represents Israel because it's not just Middle Eastern, not just Mediterranean, not just Balkan, it's sort of all those things. The fact that we have a vegan restaurant that people are going to all the time.
Right.
And they're not going because they're vegans. Most of your clientele...
No, 95% are not.
95% are not. And people are coming to Zahav, because they're willing to eat some cool food.
15 years ago when I started cooking, if we had a vegetarian come into the restaurant, it was, whatever sides you had on the entrees that you piled onto a plate and sold it. And I don't know that anybody would understand the word vegan. And now, first of all, from a commercial standpoint, you can't turn your back on customers that are looking for vegan and vegetarian options. Financially, you will lose. But also, there's just such an interest in eating that way that it's, obviously you guys have proven that it's its own, it stands on its own, and it's not just something that's sort of on the edges.
It's also the chef's mentality too. 15 years ago, if you went to a restaurant in Philly and asked for a vegetarian meal, you'd hear pots and pans being thrown around in the kitchen. No one wanted to do this.
Yeah.
And these days, it's a challenge. Like if someone comes in here and asks for a raw tasting menu, I'm like, sure, let's check it out. The chefs really want to cook they want to do something different these days. It's not just a job anymore, it's our passion. So if someone gives us a challenge.
It's a creative outlet.
Yeah, it's like an elimination challenge.
I think there's also a new connection maybe between, and whether it's real or imagined on both ends, there's a connection between the chef owner, right? Because they're saying Philly's a good place for starting. Well, the chefs take so much pride in their first restaurant. And then if they're able to get that liquor license, or if they're able to open another location, you appreciate your customer base so much. And then you go to all these great lengths to instill great service among your staff. And then to communicate with all the great social media that we have these days to really brand yourself and get your message out. So on our end, we're reaching out. And then you have all these customers who are, if they're a fan, like they can't get enough. They come in and they read your story and they're liking your pictures, and there's a great connection. And I think that's really different. I mean, you didn't have that 5 years ago, certainly not before that. Sure. And it's very powerful because it sort of builds this great energy. And if you're good at what you do, it just can take off from there.
Well, I think it's very interesting what you're talking about, because I could ask you about television and the celebrity chef idea, but I think it's more, and perhaps that has trickled down, or maybe it's the result of what you're talking about. The chef is a creative artist. That is, I don't know how new that is. Certainly in France, it's always existed. But in this country, and particularly in Philadelphia, the notion that this is a creative outlet like music and painting and writing is something that I think people have come to appreciate widely.
Absolutely. Well, there's an identity that you create, and it's, if you look at our examples, like we're not just cranking out a new Italian restaurant that has the same menu that you would find at the Italian restaurant in the suburbs or an Italian restaurant in any other city. You put so much of your own fingerprints on the restaurant. And it's an experience. It's not just a meal. You're hoping to create a relationship that's going to stand out in someone's memory and make them want to return and bring other people.
Well, I want to talk about, and I think it relates to this, the pairs that we're seeing now of people starting restaurants. Chefs, usually chefs who are also, business people, or one of them is a business person at least, and what it is about this, because it seems to me that in the past it was more the singular chef. And maybe it had to do with a kind of individualism in the society where you didn't share. And now you have people who are working more as a team, creating, we could go through the city and see, 10, 20 examples of teams of people with restaurants. What do you make of that phenomenon, and how, do you think it's new? Steve?
I don't know that it's new. I'm a huge fan of partnerships. The first restaurant that I opened, for the first year, I was on my own, and it was definitely the loneliest year of my life. It's a stressful, tough industry. To be able to share that burden with someone it makes the job that much more rewarding. But it's about finding the right partner, and I've certainly been in good partnerships and bad partnerships, so it's about finding the right partner. But and if you can do that, I think you're not coming up with ideas in a vacuum. You're having someone to bounce it off of, and those ideas get refined, hopefully into something good.
And complementarity,
yes.
Right? Where one completes the other. Certainly in your case, as pastry chef and chef, you do that. And I assume you're more the business side at this point, and you're the.
That's what everyone thinks. Steve started off as a chef. Well,
I know he did. Yeah.
A business guy first, but I don't know. Everyone sort of assumes that. I think, as we especially open more restaurants, I don't actually know what we both do.
You're figuring it out as
we
you go
come up
along.
with, with the exception of Zahav, I think that we come up with the menus together. Actually, Abe Fisher, Steve was, I guess, more of the chef, the executive chef.
It's pretty fluid. I think it's funny because people look at us and they assign these roles to us, and the fact is, Mike's a great business person and takes on a lot of that. So it's very fluid, but it's funny how people
They like to pigeonhole.
They
I
do.
think that's what it is. But Abe Fisher, I mean, that's the restaurant that I am very drawn to and have not been able to get a reservation at.
We can make that. We can fix that.
Yeah. But I just love the concept. I mean, I think the idea of traditional Jewish food, but with a modern edge, is just something that Philadelphians it's perfect for what we would embrace here. You all have more than one restaurant. And you, Mike and Steve, have more than two. What issues of quality control and juggling different kinds of food, how do you manage that? And is it a challenge? Is it more of a challenge than you had imagined initially?
I don't think it's more of a challenge. I think it is probably the hardest thing to do. Is maintaining integrity is by far the hardest thing to do. I think that it just comes with, it comes down to staff. It comes down to having the right people in place. I think growing too quickly is a problem, and I guess we've been pretty cautious of that.
You think it's been very careful in terms of your expansion?
I think the upper limit on growth is having the good people that can step into those roles. If you don't have that, then there's no point in growing because it's not going to be the same quality.
Do you have long-time personnel?
We do, and I agree with these guys. It's the key to everything. You've got to have a great staff because you really can't do anything without them. Anytime, it's funny because in these days, we alluded to earlier, the celebrity chef, I always take the time to, it's usually our name or, it might be Mike's name on something or my name on something. I always take the time to make sure I thank everyone that helped us get there because, you can't do this alone, not at all. You can barely do one restaurant alone, let alone many. And, you need great people with you, and that's the name of the game. So I think having the right people in the right places is key, and then constantly being there. They've got to know that you didn't just open up a restaurant and say, hey, just run this. They've got to know that you're invested in it with the quality, that you didn't do it just for the money or for the ego, that you're completely committed to the restaurant. So I'm there every day at both places just to check in, see how they're doing. Do you need anything? Do you have any questions? And knowing that they have me there supporting them, they have the confidence to kind of keep doing what they're doing on their own.
I want to talk about some of these issues that are in the wins relating to food and how they affect you. Organic produce, calorie issues, cruelty to animals, food safety, environmental stuff. Does this, I know your restaurants in some ways are attuned to these things, but do you ever feel oppressed by a climate in which this awareness seems to be, what's the next thing they're going to have to be concerned about?
Well, I don't feel oppressed by it. Rich said earlier, like back in the day, somebody say vegetarian, you'd have to hear the pots and pans in the back. I think you have to pay attention to everything that's going on, and you want to be aware of what people are going to be talking about at the table. You want them to focus on the food. If they're distracted by other things, well, you don't want to give them ammunition or something. You want to just stay tuned in. For me, allergies is a huge one. And I remember not too long ago, maybe a year ago or almost a year ago, there's a big hubbub about allergies and what is the role of the restaurant to accommodate people? At what point do you draw the line? And we have a monthly meeting with our staff here at Vedge, and I brought it up and I sort of said, let's use this as an opportunity to provide good hospitality. You were saying you can't turn your back on vegans coming who want to have a nice meal. So yeah, basically you learn. And
so gluten-free,
yeah,
and peanuts and things
sure.
like that.
Oh, everything, yeah. Onions, garlic sometimes. My favorite one of all was they were allergic to curly parsley, but not flat leaf parsley. So, I mean, what are you going to do?
Sometimes there's
Yeah,
So
I know somebody who's allergic to black pepper, but not red pepper. So
Right.
I don't know why that is.
Yeah.
But, do you have the same feeling that this is something that you feel is part and parcel of having to run a restaurant nowadays?
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
It is, and allergies are what they are, and dietary restrictions are what they are.
It's about making the customer happy, and I think there's a switch that sometimes you can see flipped in young cooks who may start out thinking it's about them and the food that they want to cook, but it's not. It's about making the customer happy, and you have to be willing and able to set your ego aside because ultimately that's your customer.
But there's also a kind of conflict between taste and cost on the one hand, and some of these other issues on the other. I mean, it does drive up the price.
Sure.
It may eliminate a certain clientele that, and I wonder about that. I also wonder, maybe we're seeing a division relating to food in this country the way we're seeing a division in terms of class and wealth. That, people who are wealthy and educated eat good food because they can afford it and because they've been educated, and those who aren't, don't.
These are the fun questions, huh?
Yeah.
So tell me about some of the pressures and whether you feel you have figured out a way to, I mean, I know running a restaurant under any circumstances is probably a very stressful kind of endeavor.
Yeah.
So what do you
I think any business that one is attached to is like that. Anything that you're passionate about and anything that you're doing sort of by yourself is always that involved. A lot of people think that running a restaurant is like difficult, which it really is. I haven't done anything else, so I couldn't tell you, but any independent business owner, I think, has to sort of do the same thing, and especially once you start having tons of employees, I mean, the pressure can be great. To us, or to me, I'm happy that we don't have to charge $150 a person, and I think that when you're talking about something as subjective as food, like a guide isn't, you want great ratings so your restaurant is busy, but I don't like the ego thing is, I can't relate to that.
I think you get into this business though, like knowing that. I mean, it's sort of like you ask the governor, well, did you ever aspire to be a president? Like, well, of course. I think you kind of get into this, especially if you're leading. You don't want to just be like an executive chef at a hotel or something. Like you're into it and you believe in it, and so
you
I
want
think
to express yourself.
So you're seeking that, and it's not just about stroking your own ego, but it's, at least for us, like we so believe in what we do. And, I just want to share it with people. And if it can get out there for great. If it's just here, great too. But I just stand behind it so strongly. So yes, there's pressure that if you do take another step, the more steps you take, like, yes, you're taking risks. So the more your name is out there and the more money you have invested and the more people that are believing in you, it can be a little scary sometimes.
So you guys, talking about the next step, you guys have V Street, and you also have this line of sauces through Williams and Sonoma. You have, how many restaurants now? Five.
I don't know.
You can't even count them. It's like not having so many children. At a certain point, you don't. What is the next? Is there another step in the works down the road? I mean, is there another restaurant? Is there another city? Is there another initiative, as
All
they
the
say?
above. All the above.
Do you want to just share with us briefly something that you want?
Steve just wrote our cookbook, which is coming out.
And what is it called?
Zahav.
Zahav.
We wrote it together.
And you have Vedge.
Right, and we're working on the V Street cookbook.
Okay.
Nice.
Books are fun.
Yeah, as long as you aren't attached to the idea of making money.
Okay, there's no money in it.
The other question I had, and we're almost out of time, is movies and food and chefs. There have been such a spate of movies lately about chefs, and I like the one about the guy who gave up his restaurant to open a food truck. What are your thoughts about that, these movies? Do you have a favorite?
The only food movie that I have seen and enjoyed was the movie called The Big Night.
Yeah.
No,
that's what I was gonna say.
That's an older one, but it's a great one.
I thought it was great.
Yeah.
The scene where the chef is making the dishwasher an omelet, like
At the end, in real time too.
I think it's right, exactly. And that was the omelet looked really good too. But I don't think that Hollywood has done a particularly good job of portraying like the restaurant life.
You feel that
we're working on that too.
Oh, okay. I look forward to the movie, Zahav, the movie, right?
Yeah.
Anything you like that has come out? Or do you have time to watch it?
Yeah, we don't have time to watch it. I do agree with Mike though that Hollywood hasn't done us any favors. I mean, we're not all kind of sleep deprived maniacs, and we're not always yelling and screaming. We're not Gordon Ramsay. No, I mean we do this because we love it. You know, it's not like, you know, we're not the land of misfit toys where I guess we'll cook. You know, we
But
can't do anything else.
it's raised your profile, let's put it that way.
You know, I will
think
point
people-
out, like, Anthony Bourdain had a really interesting trajectory because I guess he always aspired to be a writer, but here he was just kind of cooking. And for some reason, like, he just resonated with people. And now he's on CNN, and now there are all these other people following his path and having their own really interesting shows on CNN. So I feel like food has gotten into television more than it has in film. We'll see what happens.
I find it interesting that the more the media covers, you know, more people are interested in watching about food and restaurants on TV, the less interested they are in actually cooking. Like before I went to culinary school, I watched the Food Network and I learned to cook from like Mario Batali and, you know, Alton Brown, and those shows don't exist anymore. It's all
competitive
and it's all.
That's a fascinating point.
There's no teaching going
it's
on,
all
which is great for us
Great for
because
you, 'cause
we
people
can
go
can
out.
cook. So.
I thought a huge turning point in food TV is when Emeril Lagasse would get up there and say, I'm going to add 10 cloves of garlic, and the audience would erupt. I mean, they're cheering like it's a concert, and I thought that was the beginning of the kind of food craze that's going on right now. That it is theater, and it is there is a little bit of rock and roll to it, so it's pretty cool. It's a great time to be in this industry.
Yeah. Well, I want to say, since we're out of time, that it's been a pleasure talking to
Thanks
the
for
four
having
of
us.
you.
It's great.
Thanks.
And I look forward to eating at all these restaurants very soon.
Excellent.
And thank you for joining us today at the Drexel Interview.